Good morning, viewers. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Vibhuti Jha. All of us are very caught on with the coronavirus and the way it has impacted everyone globally, people all over the world. It hasn't spared anyone. One of the things that we have learned from coronavirus that it showed its neutrality with reference to gender, caste, color, race, country, national boundaries, religion. It has shown us that its neutrality in more ways than one. And talking about it 4 or 5 weeks into the quarantine and lockdowns that the entire world is experiencing, we know one thing for sure, that Mother Earth and Mother Nature, applying the Gaia principle, have begun to take care of herself. And we know that this is happening in a very different way. The world climate change is also getting impacted. So Mother Earth and Mother Nature have taken care of herself. So all the pollution that we were talking about, we were destroying the nature as it is, and we were trying to be its savior. Well, Mother Nature said, I'll take care of that, don't worry. Now it's important to address this situation going forward. And this also connects with me very well in the subject matter that our own Sanatan Dharma is non-discriminatory. It doesn't discriminate between people. It is all-encompassing. It's a universal principle to address all kinds of distinctions and is an accepting form of belief system. We don't discriminate. People in the West talk about diversity, inclusion, but we are a society that has lived with diversity forever. We have been the most welcoming country and belief system of all religions, persecuted religions in the world. They all came to India. That's something which is very interesting, that how I draw the parallel. People may agree or not. Now, to discuss this matter, how people have volunteered to help people, and how this global supply chain is now impacted. That's also a very known factor, because essential services, non-essential services, supply chains of food, what have you, everything is impacted. Import, export, globalization. To discuss this matter, I have great privilege in welcoming Mr. Jagadish Turimella. Jagadish ji is the president of New Jersey chapter of Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh. And he's also a co-founder of a supply chain company called GEP. I will leave it to Jagadish ji to explain what GEP is. But welcome to the program, Jagadish ji, and really delighted to have you, and thank you for finding time to join me here today.
Vibhuti ji, thank you again for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here connecting with you and chatting again with you about the topics that are passionate to you and me both. And so as a quick introduction, I live in New Jersey with my wife and 3 children, and the company that you mentioned, GEP, which is a supply chain and procurement management consulting and technology company that we started about 20 years ago with a couple of my classmates from my business school. Today, we are fortunate to be a mid-sized company with roughly about 5,000 people, serving roughly around 500 global clients in the food industry, in the multiple verticals in the life sciences industry, and several Fortune 500 companies are in our client list. So as you mentioned, we are in a very unprecedented time. Again, I keep reminding all my employees and colleagues and that we're very fortunate and privileged. We feel privileged to be in a business that translated reasonably well from being in offices to working from home. As all our global offices were closed for the last 7 weeks, we have been working from home, and we've adjusted to that the new normal during this amid this pandemic. So far, we have our business is impacted, but not as badly as some of the other businesses in our various client industries. Some of the industries in the food, retail, are dramatically impacted. We can talk about that in a minute.
Sure.
But coming back to my personal passion around the outside of my profession, you mentioned the Hindu Sanatana Dharma. I didn't grow up I grew up in Hyderabad in India, but I didn't grow up in a Shaka family or Sangha family as many of the folks in the HSS organization. But my parents, I grew up as one of the 6 children in a modest home with my father being a government employee. But just the way they carried themselves and their way of life, it really kind of showed what Sanatana Dharma is, and kind of they've instilled those values, which later on I learned as after I got married. Actually, my wife and her family is actually grew up in very much in the Sangha family, and my wife's brother, he spent about 20 years in Atlanta. And he was a pracharak, full-time pracharak. He took 2 years off from his career to serve the communities in the US, in the Caribbean area. So that really kind of inspiring. Those are some of the stories that inspired me and drew me into the Hindu HSS US organization, the Hindu Swayam Sevak organization. So that's how I've been involved with that organization now for roughly the last 30 years or so. My official duty responsibility is the Sangha for New Jersey, the president of the New Jersey division. And then Sewa and HSS have been doing a tremendous amount of activities in this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to take the cue, that one of the things that comes very naturally to us is to do Seva. And, although there is so much of inconsistency around the world, selfishness is a motive, people doing so. But one of the beauties of our faith is that the concept of Seva, what is called selfless Seva, it's a very interesting thing that a lot of us forget that. And I'm very delighted to come to know that Seva became a major effort by the organization. So share with us, how did you do it? Did you meet with any opposition? And what are the experiences in this regard that is relevant? Because in this country, what is a lot of people miss out on is that while there is no free lunch, people deeply appreciate and admire people doing voluntary work for the community. And that is one area of work that prosperous Indians and Indians as a whole must adopt as part of their own cultural milieu, to showcase in this country that we are not only high-class professionals making high income, high median income, living a good life, having good values, but that we contribute to the society. And that's very important for us to make a mark. And I'll share with you one of my conversations with one of the senators, and he said, we love you Indians as migrants to this country because you are professionals, you are educated, you do well in life, you take care of your family, you take care of your children, you have family values, you are least problem on the law and order side, right? And you ask for nothing. And I had to tell him that this is the belief system where we believe in giving. So while the charitable organizations as in institutions have prospered a lot here, in India, Dhan as a word has not prospered as much. But we'll come back to that later on. But share your experiences of the Seva that HSS did in the communities around you, and what was your experience interacting with the institutions and people when you did the Seva?
Yeah, absolutely, Vibhuti. It's really kind of touching to see the level of engagement and involvement from various volunteers from both the HSS US organization and the Sewa International organization. I'll talk about a couple of things. One, on the Sewa International took up a leadership program to really collaborate with a large number of organizations in the US. that believe in the same cause, and they reached out to roughly about 30 national, international organizations with about 1,000 different local chapters. And these 1,000 organizations collectively have pledged and endorsed their support to the Sewa International towards this COVID-19 coronavirus relief activities, support activities. And that's kind of very touching to see the grassroots efforts, the 1,000 organizations working in a collaborative way towards this cause. And some of the specific activities were, what Sewa International did was to set up these helplines. So there's this helplines anywhere in the country that anybody can reach out to. And those helplines are manned by volunteers. Roughly, there are over 2,000, roughly 2,500 volunteers are working behind the scenes on various activities, including the helpline. The helpline is really helping all the, whether, someone is looking for, health advice, someone doesn't know where to go to get tested if they're seeing some symptoms. So they're helping them connect to the local health departments, and they have all the basic one-on-one information about, where to go based on where the individual resides. And there's also have doctors on their volunteer support and supporting them, helping them with any medical advice and calming. As you can imagine, there's a lot of anxiety among the people, and so they're providing support. There's also they're providing support on there's a lot of people that are stranded, that are either visiting the U.S. or international students. It's a large community of international students that are stranded when the universities and colleges closed, and they were all told to go home. And there was only, with the limited travel restrictions and all of that, so that they're helping them with, settle in doing that transit and supporting them through that. So those are some of the activities on the helpline side. But beyond that, the second big area I would call out is it's amazing, it's heartwarming to see there's so many volunteers stitching the face masks. In over 30,000 face masks have been stitched domestically, and then they've taken and then distributed them to a lot of the PPE equipment, not only to the frontline healthcare workers, the N95 masks and other equipment and gowns, et cetera, gloves and et cetera, but also for all the frontline workers and like the police, the fire marshals, and various other people that are working during this crisis. So that's another area that's amazing amount of support. Now, you asked about some of the challenges we ran into. So I'll tell you one story. In New Jersey, we used to go to the food pantries to drop off food, and that continued. But then their concerns, obviously, as you can imagine, their concerns grew when we were dropping off the food about and they wanted to make sure, they wanted to close the pantries. But the people were still there. They were still looking for food. So we converted that to more of a fundraiser, and then started transferring some of the money raised through the funds to these recipients so that they can still get the food from the grocery stores and continue that support so that they're not stranded. And then the second area was that again, going back to the supply chain aspect you were talking about. Today, there's plenty of supply for these N95 masks, but there was a lot, as you can imagine, there was a lot of shortage of those in the late February, March timeframe. So we've both from the Sewa International Organization, but also some of the GEP task force, we established a task force. Being in a supply chain, that is one of our expertise. So really kind of doing a lot of due diligence on where the supply is, and qualifying some of those suppliers and connecting them with where the biggest need is in the hospitals in the Northeast area. Both connecting them and then providing that information for these hospitals and their procurement departments. But also, Sewa itself procured a lot of those in their warehouses, and there's several pictures of those, of people, distributing those boxes of, gloves, masks, and gowns, et cetera, to the local hospitals.
No, that's pretty awesome. And considering the fact that you said that the 2,500 volunteers stepped up and stepped in to provide support, not only to themselves, but to the people around them, that's pretty impressive. And people need to know this part of the work. I remember the Consul General, Mr. Chakravarti, Sandeep Chakravarti, also sent me a video about talking about Sewa's work, and that's truly remarkable. And this is all what the word that I was missing out, the Sanskrit word, is Nishkam Seva. These are the selfless work that you were not expecting anything from this. And that part of the thing that essentially defines us. Now, this brings me to another subject matter, that while volunteers from various organizations, and Sewa included, have done a heroic job, in this regard, how do you wish to chronicle it? And how do you wish to showcase this? Because one of the things which is very important is that we Hindus, somewhere along the line, we are the most maligned group of people, and rather unfairly and very sadly. Because I would share that my experience with you, that since when I came here in 91, my job was to market India in this part of the world. So, you know how you have studied here and you have gone to University of Chicago. This society is driven with an inquiring mind, asking questions, right? They don't say, what is the answer? They say, what's the question, right? So the education system is very differently fine-tuned. And that inquiring mind I had way back home. And I began to inquire that why in heavens, when our philosophy is so suited to the world around us, why nobody's talking about it? In the process, I became a better Hindu. I became a better Indian, because I began to then study, because I had to answer questions. And trust me, when we meet sometime, I'll tell you that I have answered questions which have ranged between sublime to stupid. But, I can't call the question, because there are no stupid questions, only stupid people giving stupid answers. So the point which I'm trying to drive at is that we have to, somewhere along the line, the Hindus, whether you are an Andhraite or me as a Bihari or wherever, we have to come together. And one of the reasons that we Hindus suffer is a lack of unity of purpose in what we do. It's like, it is Andhra problem, it's a Bihar problem, it's a Kerala problem, it's a Punjab problem. It's not my problem, right? How does that unity of purpose get established in our belief system? Because otherwise, what is happening is that we are getting marginalized. You said something very interesting, you used the word engaged. And I believe that we Hindus need to get more engaged with the society at large here. Because in my conversations with the non-Indians, and I do mix with a lot of them, when I explain to them our faith and our beliefs, they say, why the hell don't you tell us about it? And I say, that's our failing, because we don't proselytize. But we need to do prachar. We need to talk about it. And this was a learning I had way back in India when I was working with American Express Bank. In a context, my country manager told me that all the good work that you do, if you don't tell me, how in heavens will I know about it? And that's the thing I said, they don't teach you in Ivy League schools. It's not about blowing your trumpet. It's not about beating your drum. It's about letting people know who you are, what you are, and what you stand for. So how do we do that under the banner of your passion and the Sangh as a society? Because we get attacked. Because we get attacked as idol worshippers, and we have no God, as if we are the aberration to humanity. And I take that very strongly. Your thoughts?
That's a brilliant question. I think that's but by nature, the Hindu religion itself, I don't see that as much of a religion. It's a faith. It's just a way of life. You don't get baptized into the religion in Christianity. In Christianity and the other religions, here it's just you live a certain way of life, regardless of who you are, where you're born, where you grew up. You are leading a Hindu life, and so and by nature the culture associated with it is not that where you go and you talk about it. You talk about what that religion is, what that what the belief is, and you just live it. You just live it. That's exactly the story I was telling about my mom and dad. And they didn't tell me that this is better, that's better. They just were living it, and I was just watching them, work hard, and basic human values of, work hard and they live live a high integrity life, and then leave the result. Don't be so focused on the result. But I think just that way of life is what you see exhibited by all of us, even living here outside of India and in the U.S. And I mean the point you made about the senator's comment, I think, yeah, I absolutely agree. We go about our lives, living our Hindu way of lives, and if people observant people will understand and will capture and saying, wow, this guy is happy or this family is happy and they're doing great, they're doing well, and but we don't talk about it. But I think there is to your point, I think, there is an awareness piece. I think we can share with the rest of the world. And I think there is a bit of an engagement in the local communities. There is a bit of an engagement even in the political communities. There is a bit of an engagement that can be the whole world can benefit from. And just I think that we're beginning to do that. I mean, for example, going in front of TVs and talking about HSS or Sewa this is the first time that I've been actually talking about it. So it's by nature, it doesn't occur to us, and we're not spending our energy thinking about it. And so we go about doing our activities, and people as who we are and what we stand for and what activities we do and what results and outcomes that that our community is producing will speak for itself. So I think that is ingrained in our culture. But to your point, I think there can be a lot more to be done for the benefit of the society, given the crisis that we're in now. I think there's in terms of that sharing, the simple theory, like the Maslow hierarchy of basic wants and needs. Our Hindu Dharma teaches Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha, which is what takes us, which is a beautiful principle for the pursuit of happiness. And I think I have taught that to my communities, and then also in my company employees, and it's very insightful and very simple, and it stood the test of time, and it was for over 2,000 years, still very relevant, very applicable. I was comparing that with the a recent the pursuit of happiness theory that was developed by Dr. Seligman, Professor Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. And when you put side by side, our theory and the recent theory, they were very, very similar, very close. Which was only difference is that was developed 2 years ago versus 2,000 years ago.
That's right. And this is something remarkably, because as a matter of fact, this coronavirus has brought awareness about our way of life, which the Western people will not give credit to. But I know, without naming names here, on one of the very popular show, there is a doctor from Connecticut. He talked about our way of life. They picked up certain elements of our Sanatana Dharma principle about eating, behaving, and compassion to nature. They are adopting it as their own. Now, you are very right. We don't believe in beating our drum, because that's the way we lead our life. Important thing is that this is relevant in back home. It is a different life because we are a community, a country of our own. But as the saying goes, while in Rome, do as Romans do. So now it is incumbent upon you and I, and people of similar belief, that yes, let people know who we are. Let them not wonder. It's a very interesting element of creating a narrative and defining yourself. If I don't define myself, then you are defining me. And that could be anything. And if you tell somebody this is who Vibhuti is, then if I don't define myself, then others believe in that. And that could be right or wrong, biased, vested interest, or whatever. Just like Rutgers professor, I won't name her, she does. I mean, the virulent attack that she launches on Hinduism and our scriptures is absolutely abhorrent. particularly when she says that she has studied it. Obviously, she didn't study. So it is like, it almost looks like a paid piper's job. You know, it's a hit job happening on us Hindus. So we need to cultivate that part of it strongly. And of course, I don't want to spend all the time talking about that, but you get the drift of what I'm trying to say. That, like you said, this is the first time you have come to talk about Sewa, which is good, because let the world know about it through the channels, through the technology channels. We can reach out to many more people that, hey, we are not what you think in your mind to be, but this is who we actually are. And that perception change is critical for us to remain relevant. Otherwise, what is likely to happen is we are not part of a conversation. And as you said, we are a way of life. We are pretty cool about our way of life. But in a bizarre way, the entire freedom of religion concept comes back to haunt us. So we will have this conversation later about how to make our presence felt. Let's shift to the supply chain.
If I may just make one comment
Please.
on that. I definitely, I don't see that as a big problem, Vibhuti, but I do see that as a definitely opportunity. I think there's a definitely opportunity for us to be more vocal about who we are, what we stand for, what our way of life is. And I think what I have seen is every time we speak up, they're so intrigued and they're so inspired, and they want to learn more. They want to learn more. They're more attracted to that way of life. But I do agree that we don't do that enough.
Right.
I think there is an opportunity to do more.
Thank you. Talking about your subject matter, your domain, supply chain, like there's a highly unromantic subject to talk about, but it's a remarkably critical element to talk about, right? Everything has to be supplied. I learned about supply as a student of economics, demand and supply. Everything that you demand has to be supplied. But the demand is the fashionable side. Supply chain is considered to be the backroom operations. But it plays a vital role, and nobody understood the importance of supply chain more than it is relevant today. With the coronavirus, China ban on travel, ban on movement of people, ban on export and import, foreign direct investments. You have a complete disruption in the supply chain. However, thankfully, we have not heard about any food riot happening anywhere in the world. So I think the supply chain management companies are doing a great job, and whoever is managing the food supply and other things. So share with me and with the audience how the China manufacturing, it's a pity that most of the items are made in China. Even today is what we need for daily use and everything else. But there is a heavy geopolitical element that we will talk later. But how does the supply chain change now? Because I heard somebody from India called me just 2 days ago that he was very concerned that his investment banker's son in Manhattan has to go and shop for food and groceries because there are no people available to deliver. And you realize the challenge of Manhattan, sky-rise apartments, and one guy goes to deliver, there are 50 guys going in one apartment building to deliver things, right? So those are challenges. How does one address that? That's one, typical to New York, because New York makes up of New York State and New York City. Both have the ignominy of being more than 50% of US cases of coronavirus and deaths. Both, it's so sad. That said, how is the supply chain going to change? What are you envisaging about that process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we see a tremendous amount of disruption and change in the supply chain. I'll talk about a couple of big trends that we're seeing. Some of the world has been more and more globalized in the last 2 decades, maybe 3 decades. And as you mentioned, China became a manufacturing hub for the whole world. India and some of the other countries for the information systems, and Mexico and other for some of the automotive manufacturing and food supply. But some of that pendulum, I believe, is swinging back now to more self-reliant within even nations try to become, self-sufficient, and then even local communities trying to become self-sufficient and without having to. So some of that globalization is swinging back into some of the localization is one thing that we're seeing. The second aspect is there is also a significant amount of almost forced digitization. As you can imagine, almost 100% of workforce in many cases for certain verticals or certain industries have been forced to go work from home, and everybody is talking about the work from home and the productivity and all of that. Now, many companies, including ours, the 100% of the workforce immediately transitioned to work from home within weeks, and the productivity levels are high. Sometimes I would argue even higher. So there is a significant change, and that may continue even post this pandemic and the new normal. I think everybody's talking about what that new normal is going to look like, and some companies, perhaps even ours, we may never have the 100% of the work go back into the office. There may never be a need for that, and that's going to completely redefine the workforce. So it opens up opportunities for people who need to be home to take care of either children or their elders, and still have time to provide, take a professional job and work, and that creates several opportunities for women, for others who can continue to work from home and so forth.
Right.
Then specifically on two areas, even in some of our customer base, in the food industry, where we are seeing a spike in their demand, and obviously it's just as challenging for the people to go into the factories, whether they're manufacturing food or auto manufacturing is closed, and several other industrial manufacturing plants and factories are closed, but the food manufacturing is not closed. Food retailers are not closed, so that part of the supply chain is still working, but the hazards that they have, the employees and the workers that are working in the plants, that are working in the retail stores and shipping the products to the right places in the right quantities, all that is still, the hazards are still the same, but they're still continue to work. So there we have seen significant change, and so those companies are kind of laser focused on saying, how do we make sure that our employees and safety of their employees and health and safety of their employees. And we, as a companies supporting them, are also, making sure. So they're setting up, proper when the workforce comes into the factory, for them having the ability to kind of do the temperature checks properly, and then and providing all the PPE equipment and sanitization. There's one innovation that came out of it actually. One of our clients, they came up with this mat. So because you can the hand sanitizers to clean your hands, and then everybody's washing their hands every 4 hours, every 2 hours. But then there's shoes when you walk into the factory, and we drive our cars, we walk outside, and then so they came up with this mat that when you walk into the factory and then you step on the mat, and that sanitizes your shoes, even though you wear a little sock over it. But so those are the new innovation and new things that are happening in the food and retail industry, which is still continuing to operate in this challenging times. So there's been quite a bit of challenges in their supply chain, but they're still, I would say, operating at almost 100% capacity to make sure that the whole humanity is fed in time. It has become a social cause for them beyond the corporate shareholder wealth creation.
And you said it very correctly. One of the things which is going to happen is that everywhere you go these days, you see, be local, buy local, right? And Prime Minister Modi gave that statement in India. Mr. Trump is talking about Make in America. He is talking about Make in India. So the question here is, are we seeing a rise of self-reliance, especially in the US case, which is where it is a driver of arguments, drivers of idea. United States remains so. So now the food security is a big thing. But at the same time, medicinal security. The United States suddenly realized that so many life-saving drugs are made in China, or so many security issues are very linked with this entire process. And suddenly people are awakening to the fact that, oh my God, we have outsourced everything. Now, this word has a very different connotation, but in reality, this is what is happening. It takes me back, actually, to several years ago, where it was a day I remember crystal clear. That was the day when US trade deficit with China hit $42 billion. And American policymakers and people were saying, doesn't India capture at least 10% of that manufacturing that is going to China? But our political leadership at that time was so benign, and I mean, I won't say lazy, but they were so full of themselves that they said, no, we don't need that. Consequently, Nehru had the concept of self-reliance. But, as the saying goes, that you can carry a certain argument only up to a certain point. And Swami Vivekananda said very, very nicely, when called upon to define what is poison, he said anything in excess. So, over-reliance on China for supplying your garden chairs to even your pin for 9/11, forget about these high-tech items. That kind of a thing will impact globalization as we see it, at least in the short run. Because now we live in a remarkably interconnected world, but we know that merchandise tradings will decline by anywhere between 15 to 30%. Travel is going to fall back by about 80%. FDI, foreign direct investments, are going to fall, because now these are all going to be where action is locally. So how do you envisage this kind of a thing happening and a mind shift happening from globalization to local, to national?
Yeah. I think, again, I think a lot of that is, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there about how that's going to shake out. And everyone in each of those industries are thinking about what does their new normal look like. I mean, you mentioned travel. I was listening to the United Airlines, the CEO, and they are operating about 25% of the capacity, and then most of their flights are only 30% full at the best. And when it goes back to normal and post this pandemic, there is still uncertainty about what that capacity is going to look like. And there is also the whole restaurant industry is turned upside down. These are small businesses that are making mom and pops that are making nice restaurants in local communities, and they've been shut down for several months now. And beyond that, the demand for, even when they open, there is at the best they might have 25% capacity that they can open for, and even that capacity, there is a lot of anxiety among even customers to go in and then be out in the public. So I think that everyone's thinking about what that. Now, I think the reliance on China, and I do believe a lot of the innovation is still happening in the Western world and in the outside of China, including India and Europe and US have been a big contributors, and many of them are our clients also in the pharma life sciences industry. And there is a tremendous amount of investments that are going in an accelerated fashion, both on discovery of the new drugs. Now, some of them there's probably tens of these drugs that are already being in the clinical trials, in different phases of clinical trials. And I'm hoping that it will be sooner than. And then in parallel, unlike other times, now they're, because of the impact on the humanity, they're as a social cause. Many of these companies, the privately held companies, and public companies, they're investing a lot of money in manufacturing in parallel as the R&D is taking place. Usually that is sequenced so that they can maximize they can reduce the cost, but now they're actually investing it. So as soon as when an FDA-approved drug, vaccine, and cure comes out, they can immediately produce that in mass quantities and then release that to for the public.
No, for example, in distribution, security and safety in distribution is going to play a big role. Just as you said, that somebody came up with a thought process that you go out in shoes while you wash your hands, but you don't do anything with your shoes. The shoes are the ones which take you to all the places where it gathers all the dust and whatever else. So, so that is great innovation. The other important part that you mentioned earlier on is working from home. It is a remarkable thing because I'm familiar with this. My previous company where I worked with, in 1991, American Express had a work from home policy. However, at that time, the data breach, data security, and safety of the work, we didn't have those many safety measures. So very select group of people could work from home, who came to the office only to sit in their desk and do something. So there are certain work that went out, but this will change the high-rise apartments, high-density population cities like New York or Mumbai, because why would I need to go to the studio to record a program when I can do this here? I need to improve the quality of sound or studio or whatever it may be. But when it comes to getting a job done, we can do it here. You didn't have to drive to 2 hours to my studio. I didn't have to drive an hour to my studio. We save so much time. And that will impact the real estate demand and supply as I see it. And if I give you an industrial secret, on my walk the other day, I heard somebody talking very loud that suburban real estate prices are going to shoot up in 2 to 3 years, which are the good locations, because people won't like to live in Manhattan anymore because the vulnerability has become so much more. Now, coming to the supply side part of it, there is a question, which is a geopolitical question. Global demand and global supply is a geopolitical challenge. How does India deal with the scenario of China, America in this particular point in time? Because we are such a benign country in a way that we don't matter, yet we matter. So in the scheme of things of America, China is the conversation on every television, everywhere. For China, it is America. We figure in the conversation, but we don't matter. What must India do today to take advantage of that, to assert itself that it's a big player? And I must say this, Mr. Modi is doing a great job. We have 2 minutes now. Tell me, what do you think, what India must do?
No, I think we're on a great path already. I think we just need to continue that path. Now, as I think, especially in the last 20 years, after the whole internet plumbing around the world has become more efficient, and so people, regardless of in the past, a lot of your fortunes were tied to where you were born, and today it's much less so. It's not so much about which country or where you're born. But it's you can bring your talents to the rest of the world because the world is so well connected, interconnected with high bandwidth cables and wires, and so you can perform and show your talent and contribute that talent to any deserving organization around the world. And that is really kind of equalized. I think there was even 20 years ago, the book called "The World Is Flat" is kind of that drove a lot of that equalization. Now, beyond that, I think, and which benefited India significantly. I mean, the whole information age, the IT, a lot of the companies leveraging India as a IT service providers, and that has benefited India, and it benefited the companies. The companies wouldn't do it unless it was increasing their shareholder wealth. So they were clearly pursuing the wealth creation path, but at the same time, now I think in the new world, it's less about outsourcing. It's more about the innovation and creativity, and not the you can't cut your costs to prosperity, and the prosperity and the better quality of life is going to come when there is innovation, creativity, for betterment of life, and that's, I think, I do believe the point of inflection has turned. And then as you know, as early as a few hundred years ago, the India was one of the top 2-3 GDPs in the world, and I think it has a great potential to be back there again by pivoting to innovation, creativity, which I believe it's already on its path, and I do believe, regardless of what the narrative and the rhetoric is outside, I think Modi has brought a lot of pride to the nation. It's not just one community; it's all communities and all inclusiveness of all communities. I think bringing under a single unity within India, I think he has done a good job.
Well, I think that thank you very much. The time for India has come, and as the saying goes, when the time has come, you have to grab the opportunity, because if you let that moment go, I've been saying this for many years, that India is at the cusp of technology leap. If we don't take advantage of that, we will lose out. We are the only ones to miss out on. And that's truly remarkable, because innovation, I mean, you use the word which is very dear to our work. Cost cutting happens in the absence of a strategy. That's what we say. No company became great by becoming cutting costs. Cutting costs is not a process of growth. We in India, we have a mindset: cheapest quality, cheap is best. We have to shift that mindset, and we have to know that you get quality by producing quality, manufacturing quality. And that's important, that cost cutting happens in the absence of a strategy. The real growth happens when you have innovation, entrepreneurship, and that you foster that, things happen in a quantum leap. Jagdishji, it was wonderful to have you today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too. And I hope the viewers enjoyed the conversation, from Sewa to supply chain. At least we stuck to 2 S's here. So thank you for joining. And one of the things which I tell people and Americans and everybody else, let's not try to be like them. It's okay. It's good to accept certain practices, but let's promote our practice of namaste. It's the safest one when you do namaste. So no coronavirus gets transferred. No.
No, I love the way you concluded the session. I think it's, again, to your point about, we don't talk about our way of life enough, but we do live it. And just imagine now where the world is now leading to. Like you said, namaste has no contact, but shows a tremendous amount of respect for the other individuals and humanity. And the simple things that we follow of, I've been told, I lived in a family where you walk in and you take your shoes outside the house first, and you walk into the house. First thing you do once you walk in, you wash your feet, you wash your hands. Before you eat, you wash your hands. The simple things of those things are very relevant today amid this COVID-19 as well.
As the saying goes, every conversation has to come to an end. In this particular case, the conversation has to come to an end because the time is up. So thank you for being with us. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend and see you again next week. Thank you, Jagdish, for being here.
Pleasure, Vibhuti ji. Thank you, and take care.